Hey guys, I am genuinely very excited to talk about this today, and if that makes me weird, I'm okay with it. All right, we are adding and subtracting integers. Integers are positive and negative numbers and zero. What they do not include is decimals and fractions, so if you don't like those, congrats. We're not worrying about those today. There are a lot of different ways we can add and subtract positive and negative numbers, right? And it can get kind of confusing. Well, I'm hoping to get rid of all that confusion today. Now, if you go Google adding and subtracting integers rules, you get a lot that comes up. Now, I'm not trying to shame these rules, but these kind of make my head hurt, right? Sometimes they throw in absolute value and keep the sign of the bigger absolute value and keep change and the opposite of the blah, blah, blah. Anyways, if this helps you, that's fantastic. It hurts my brain and I love math. So if you don't love math, it may hurt your brain even more than that. But I'm going to teach you a strategy that I love and I hope it will help you out. Okay, there's really just a couple steps for this, and the reason I love it is because you can use it for any of these problems and you don't have to think about it too hard. You just approach all of them the same way. Okay, all right, so when I am solving any problem like this, we'll start here. The first question I ask myself is, do I have any signs right next to each other? Now, what I mean by that is like this. See how I'm adding a negative here. There's two signs right next to each other. Here I'm subtracting a negative. There's two signs right together. Whenever I have two right together like that, I want to get it down to just one sign. And luckily it's pretty easy. Okay. Whenever I add a negative, that is the same as just subtracting. So guess what? I can rewrite this kind of scary plus parenthesis thing as just 5 minus 3. Okay, if you were to plug both of those into your calculator, you'd get the same answer. So one easy way to remember it is signs are different, keep the minus or the negative. Okay, that means if the signs are the same, we are going to leave a plus or a positive. So this minus and negative changes to 4 plus 9. Now, if you're like, there is no way that's true, how can taking away negative be positive? Let me explain it to you. All right, pretend you have something negative in your life. Maybe you're grounded. That would be a negative thing in your life, right? And then your parent comes to you and they say, hey, you know what? You have been making some pretty good choices. I am going to take away that you're grounded. I'm going to take away that negative. Well, guess what? That would be a positive thing in your life. You would be celebrating, right? So when we take away negative, it's actually positive. I can rewrite that. Now, I bet you could solve both of these problems pretty darn easily, right? So sometimes that's really all you need is to get rid of those double signs or signs right next to each other. But if you're still feeling confused, I've got more help for you. Now, as a side note, you may occasionally see something like 5 minus a positive 3. I mean, it's not super common to see, but it could happen. Same thing, signs are different. Leave the minus or the negative. You could also potentially see 4 plus a positive 9. I mean, again, not super common, but it is possible. Again, you would just leave the plus. Okay. All right. So on this first one, I'm asking myself, are there any signs right next to each other? Well, there are. They're different. I have a plus and a minus. So I am just going to leave a minus or a negative. Something that a lot of students ask me is that a minus or a negative? They're the same thing, okay? You might think of them in your head a little bit differently, but they're actually the same. All right, from here, like I said, some people might see this and be like, oh, I know the answer now. If you don't, that's totally fine. The next thing I do is I circle my positives with green and my negatives with red. All right. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't know if 5 is positive or negative, there's no sign. Whenever there's not a sign, we assume it's positive, right? So this is a positive 5. So I have 5 positives and 8 negatives. Now I go ahead and actually draw these positives and negatives. So I'm going to draw 5 positives and 8 negatives. Okay. Now a positive and a negative cancel each other out. If I have 1 and I take away 1, that's 0. So guess what? This positive and negative cancel. This one, this one, this one, and this one. And then I just count up what I'm left with. What am I left with? I'm left with 3 negatives or -3. And that is all there is to it, folks. Now, stay around for a few more examples because sometimes we just have negatives or just have positives or anyways, hang around. But I hope you're having a light bulb moment. And if you are, if you could hit the like button, that helps me out. All right, so first thing I ask myself, do I have any signs right next to each other? I don't, right? There's nothing that looks like this or like this. So now I can just go ahead and circle. Positives I circle green, negatives I circle red. Well, this one doesn't have any positives. So I know I have 3 negatives and 9 negatives. And I go ahead and draw those out. So 3 negatives, 1, 2, 3, and 9 negatives. All right, those are kind of spaced weird, but whatever. All right, does anything cancel? No, I don't have any pluses, so I just count up what I have. What do I have? I have 12 negatives, or -12. Oh my gosh, this is magic. I know. All right, let's look at this one. First question I asked, do I have any signs right next to each other? I do. I have 2 negatives right next to each other. Remember, when I take away negative, that means it's positive. You're not grounded anymore. So this I can rewrite as 3 plus 5. Now, some people will probably see 3 plus 5 and be like, sweet, I know the answer. If you do, that is great. As I have taught this often to students, sometimes when we introduce negative numbers, they see this and they kind of forget that they've been doing problems like this since kindergarten. Now, I'm not saying that in like a rude way. I'm just saying that's something I've noticed. So if you don't notice that right off, that's totally fine. You can still use this strategy until you start to notice like, oh, duh, I know what 3 plus 5 is, right? All right, so I'm going to circle my positives green, my negatives red. No sign means we're positive. So I've got 3 positives, 5 positives, no negatives. I don't have to worry about that. So 3 positives and 5 positives. Does anything cancel? Nope, I've only got positives. How many do I have? I have 8 positives. There we go. Okay. All right, let's look at this one. First thing I ask myself, do I have any signs right next to each other? I don't. So I'm going to circle my negatives red. There's 4 negatives. And my positives green. And then go ahead and draw those out. 4 negatives. And 7 positives. All right, then I ask myself, does anything cancel? Yes. Plus minus 4 times cancels out. So what am I left with? I am left with 3 positives. Now, if you're thinking this is great, internet math lady, but what happens when I have really big numbers like -700 plus 1200? I don't know. I don't want to draw that many pluses and minuses. Well, neither do I. But the hope is as you do this more and more, you'll start to be able to picture it in your mind and know like what you need to subtract from what, or oh, I need to add those and then it's negative, right? Just get those visuals in your mind, and then the hope is you'll be able to do it without drawing these. Now, no shame in drawing them. Draw them as long as you need to. But I'm just saying, hopefully at some point, it'll help you remember without necessarily needing to draw 1200 minuses or whatever, right? Okay. All right. We have 2 plus 5. Again, this is one where some of you are like, well, I know what that is. But as we introduce integers, sometimes it can get confusing for students. So we just go ahead and use the same strategy. So do I have any signs right next to each other? I don't. So I'm going to go ahead and circle my positives and negatives. 2 positives and 5 positives. I don't have any negatives. There's my 2 positives and my 5 positives. Does anything cancel? Nope. So what am I left with? 7 positives. Dun, 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 dun. All right. All right, this one can look a little intimidating, right? Like we've got a lot of minuses happening here. But same question. Are there any signs right next to each other? Yes, there are. I've got 2 minuses. Well, remember, taking away a negative, we're not grounded anymore. -7 plus 1. All right. Now I'm going to circle my negatives red. I've got 7 negatives. And my positives green. Great. Now I'm going to draw them out. So 7 negatives. 1 positive. Does anything cancel? Yes. 1 plus and 1 minus cancel. What am I left with? Well, I am left with 6 negatives, or -6. Awesome. All right, 3 more. Let's take a look at this one. Do I have any signs right next to each other? I do. They are different, so I am going to leave a minus or a negative. Now, some of you look at that and you're like, I know the answer. If you didn't know, that's all right. We're going to draw it out. So I've got 5 positives and 5 negatives. Go ahead and draw those. 5 positives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 5 negatives. Does anything cancel? Yes. Ooh, everything canceled. So what am I left with? 0. Awesome. Okay. We have -5 plus a -4. Do I have any signs right next to each other? I do. They are different. So I can just rewrite this as -5 minus 4. Circle my positives and negatives. I don't have any positives here, so I've got 5 negatives and 4 negatives. I can draw those. So 5 negatives and 4 negatives. Does anything cancel? Nope, it's all negatives. So I am left with 9 negatives, or -9. All right, last one. This is another one where you might look at it and be like, I know what that is, which is great. But if the integers are kind of throwing you off and you need to use the pluses and minuses, no shame in that, all right? Do I have any signs right next to each other? I do not. So I'm going to circle my positives. 9 doesn't have a sign, but it's positive. 4 is negative. So I'm going to draw 9 positives and 4 negatives. Does anything cancel? Yes. First of all, I want to point out, I don't know what it's like, or when it is, I should say, when you're watching this, but when I'm recording this, we are 1 week before Christmas, so the red and green is making me a little happy and feel festive. You're welcome, even if you're watching this in July. All right, so the pluses and minuses cancel. 1 plus with 1 minus. What am I left with? 5 positives, or 5. Awesome. Okay, I really hope this strategy was helpful. If you need some more videos, I will link a playlist in the corner for you. Thanks.